Rahul, please start the session.
So, good afternoon, one and all, dear respected professors, researchers, and all other participants. I, Rahul Kumar, on the behalf of Department of Management, Jamia Hamdard, New Delhi, welcome all you to this 5-day long FDP on structural equation modeling and artificial neural network in management research. The guest speaker for today's session is Dr. Sunil Buddhi Raja. So before we begin, let me introduce Dr. Sunil Buddhi Raja to all of you. Dr. Buddhi Raja, a doctorate from Punjab University, is a faculty member with the School of Management and Labor Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai campus. Sir has more than 15 years of experience in teaching, research, and consultancy, and Sir has served at reputed academic institutes including IIM Ahmedabad and Symbiosis International, Pune. And Sir has also handled several training and consultancy assignments. Sir is capable of performing both qualitative and quantitative research and in terms of research outcomes. Sir has more than 20 publications in world-class reputed journals, which also include publishers such as Emerald, Elsevier, and Wiley. Sir has completed a research project with the University of Helsinki, Finland, and Sir has also delivered several workshops for the researchers, faculty members, and corporate professionals. Sir likes to work with government organizations and has an exposure of working with some prestigious organizations that include Rajya Sabha Secretariat, Government of Rajasthan, ITB, and Ministry of Finance. The core area of Sir includes learning, organization, change management, and performance management. With all, I welcome you, sir, on the behalf of Department of Management, and I hope we will all together have a great learning. And I wish all the very best to the participants. And over to you, sir, Dr. Buddhi Raja, sir. Sir, you are not audible. Your mic is on
Yeah,
mute.
thank you, Rahul. Thank you for reminding. So I would like to extend my heartfelt thank and gratitude to Dr. Rahul, first of all, for a comprehensive introduction. I again thank and acknowledge the efforts made by the department, Dr. Mohammad Damshed in specialty. And I also would like to thank all the participants who have spared time to participate in this virtual 5-day long workshop. So, cutting it short, I think we all have had session one, which is largely on the facets of research, where I think I just got a couple of line feedback from Dr. Reena Talwar. She said that they talked about the process of research largely, which begins with identification of a problem and then getting into a comprehensive, maybe an year long path where many people have the persistence to follow and many people stop in between also, correct? So in this session, in this and the coming session, because I would be taking two sessions of 2 hours each, I'll be talking largely about the fundamentals of structural equation modeling, correct? Because structural equation modeling or structural equation model is a comprehensive concept, and it largely applies to the field of quantitative research, correct? I think in the initial level workshop, because assume and I presume that most of you have a fair amount of understanding about the various terms, various jargons, various concepts which normally are talked about in a post graduation or PhD level coursework. Correct. So today we'll talk a little beyond, and we'll try to enter into the field of latent constructs. Correct. So we'll talk about the concept of construct, the concept of formative and reflective construct, and then we will enter into the first, because there are two parts to this entire workshop. Rather, there are two major parts, and within first part there are two subparts. Correct. So if you have seen the title, it says structure equation modeling and artificial neural network, ANN. So I'm keeping ANN as part 2 and SCM as part 1. So within SCM, there are largely two parts. One is called as CB based SCM. CB stands for covariance based. And second is PLS SEM, partial least square structure equation. So SEM itself has got two parts. And if you are into research from last so many years, you might see a lot of research paper, they upright mention that we have followed a CB based SEM and we have followed a PLS based SEM. Correct. So I will not enter into the field of PLS. I will be talking about the overall concepts. If you are aware, the topic for this session is reliability and validity, and these two concepts using SPSS and AMOS. Correct. Now AMOS, some people call it as AMOS. I think it is one of the same thing, but the proper pronunciation is AMOS. AMOS is a software, is an add-in software which comes along with SPSS by the same company IBM. So we'll be talking about the concept of reliability and validity, and we'll talk about the fundamentals of AMOS, because in the second session the title that's been given is higher order constructs. Correct. So the moment we talk about higher order construct, we have to understand zero order, first order, second order, third order, so on and so forth. So let me begin by sharing my presentation, and after that we can, let me just a second, put it on slideshow mode. So before I begin, I would like to know about the background. How many of Dr. Jamshed, if you can better tell me, how many of them are from teaching fraternity who are full fledged into teaching, and how many of you are who are into PhD program and have not started their teaching career? I think there is a hand raised already. Yeah, you can please ask.
Those who are doing PhD, they can raise their hands first.
I think 18 hands are up, more than that. Chaliye. And how many of you have actually experienced the software called as AMOS in the past? Maybe you have tried doing convergent validity, or you might have done CFA or path analysis. These are the frequent terms that I would be talking, or beyond me, there are many good speakers who are coming in the next 4 days. Each one of them will speak about, I think now I can see about 6 hands. So out of 100 odd who are maybe 87 plus who are sitting here, around 7-8 have some experience of working with the software called as AMOS, but majority of you would like to learn. So I'm assuming that nobody knows, because if you know something, you want to add something to it, most welcome. But since 90% of you have not worked, so I may like to get into the shake hand of AMOS. How does it work? What are the various interface? What are the various tabs? What are the various options that we have? Correct. So before that, I think what I can do is maybe I can invest about half an hour to 45 minutes in understanding these two terms and some associated terms before this. I think you all can see the screen that I've shared, the PPT, and we can start by knowing these two terms a little more theoretically. Before I get into this, I would like to just give you a glimpse of what I'm going to cover in the entire 4 hours today, 12 to 2 and 2 to 4. So I have to begin with the concept of latent variable, because the concept of latent variable requires reliability. We need to check the validity. I'll talk about it. What is it? How do we formulate and all? Second thing that I will be talking about is the importance, which is more theoretical. I will just kind of run through it maybe for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes for those who have not brushed it recently. And then I will talk about the calculation part using SPSS and AMOS. Before that, it is important for us to know what this software is and how does it help in achieving the construct reliable, construct validity and construct validity also. And in between, because everything there is an overlap. although if you look at the next session, the session title is higher order construct, but within this, if there is some introduction which is required, so what I intend to do is I will cover the theoretical part of all these 5 things, and then I will go on to the software. And I do not know whether all of you have an access to both these softwares, SPSS and AMOS, but I would like to do a lot of
We had Professor, we had shared the SPSS
trial version.
trial version, AMOS trial version.
Perfect.
So if they only need the data, the sample data. If you will tell them, then they will be able to do that.
Okay, that's perfect. I will share it maybe here only, or I can send an email to Dr. Jamshed and you can send it across, correct? But for the next half an hour, 45 minutes, I'll be talking about certain fundamental terms so that we all are on the same plane with the same philosophical understanding, correct? Now, normally, if you talk about research, we use some basic jargons or basic terminology, and we at times get confused between these 3, 4, 5, 6 terms that are written on this slide. At times we say concept, at times we say construct, at times we say variable. So I just want to just run you through these 3, 4, 5 terms so that we do not have any confusion, any ambiguity, correct? Komal is asking for the MS trial version. I think that's been shared already.
That is being shared on the WhatsApp group. If you have not joined the WhatsApp group, then I will share the link of the WhatsApp group in the chat box.
Okay, anybody who knows these 4 terms and who feels that these 4 terms you need not to talk about, we know all these 4 bullet points, and you can just jump onto the concept of reliability and validity using SPSS and MS. Should I jump onto that, or should I invest some time on these 3, 4 terms?
Sir, I think you've already covered this in the last session.
But
So
yeah,
just
yes, I have covered. But thank you, Dr. Marina. But I believe that 40% is the same audience, 60% is the newcomers. So
Please
maybe for some
continue.
of
It's
them,
I really
yeah,
need to understand these terminology. Thank
great,
you.
great, thank
Okay.
you. So I will rather begin with the objective of quantitative research, correct? Although qualitative, quantitative both have one objective which is same, to contribute to solve the problem, to contribute to the existing literature, to make decisions, to get evidence. You may have multiple answers, correct? Sonal, I'm explaining everything. But if you look at the quantitative research, it differs from the qualitative in one way, and that is that we try to make inferences based upon a small data which we call as sample, and that inference we would like to apply on the larger data which we call as population, correct? So the objective of quantitative research is making inferences. Inference means you have a sample which you believe is a true representative of the population. Why is it true? Because you believe that you have used probability sampling to extract that, you have taken the right size, you have knowledge about the confidence level and all those technical terms. But eventually the objective of quantitative research is making inferences, correct? And the success depends upon, I've told you 2, 3 things. One is the adequacy of sample size, and second is how do you minimize those errors and biases. I think all these are very, very theoretical, and I have spoken about them in the previous sessions. So you can refer to any book that gives you the formula to calculate sample size, that tells you how do you minimize sampling error and non-sampling error. Within that, response bias, non-response bias, and much more. So without getting into all that, I'll move on to the terms which are generally confused. I think concept is the fundamental term which is being written or which has been explained globally as a common characteristic of a situation or of an event or of an object, correct? For example, the characteristic associated to motivation will be called as concept of motivation. If you talk about science, if you talk about physics, if you talk about chemistry, you may have multiple concepts, correct? So concept basically is a meaning associated to an event or some characteristics associated to an object or a condition or a situation or a behavior. Since we believe that we are from social science and behavioral studies, so we generally use the concepts which are associated to behavior, correct? Whether it is marketing, finance, operations, HR, leadership, general management and all that. So we use generally behavioral concepts, right? For example, I have written examples: motivation, emotion, but there can be concepts which are related to the events, which are fundamental, which are global, which are universal. They can be related to the objects, they can be related to the conditions or situations also, correct? So similarly, there are two terms which are constructs and variable. Now the only difference between a concept and a construct is concept is generally well defined. Concept is generally a phenomena which has a kind of discrete meaning, whereas a construct is loosely defined. Construct is more ambiguous, correct? So construct is more in psychology, more in anthropology, more in philosophy, more in management, where the meaning or the interpretation or the inference or the definition may vary with respect to an individual, whereas concept is largely which is universal, correct? So we generally deal with constructs rather than concepts. Am I right if I say that? Because motivation to me is different than motivation to what Neha Makkad says or what Nidhi Jain says or what anybody else says, correct? So in management, in social science, we will be dealing with construct, and there is a thin line of difference between the two. But we will be using the term variable more often rather than calling it a construct. Why? Because construct, the value of the construct generally varies, because we try to measure the construct in quantitative terms. And if it is quantitatively measured, then the values, the responses tend to vary. And generally, if something varies, we call it as variable, correct? So construct, variable, concept almost have similar meaning, but they are used slightly differently. And then within construct, you may have unidimensional construct, you may have multiple dimensional construct. We'll talk about it. And the other difference that we should know fundamentally is the difference between proposition and hypothesis. Between two constructs, there is a difference, there is a relationship that is called as proposition. Proposition means you believe that there is an association, but it has not been empirically proved. By empirically, I mean not proved using primary data basically. So the moment you call it as data ka matlab there is a variation now. So then it becomes variable. So from construct to variable. In theoretical plane, it is construct. In empirical plane, it is variable. In theoretical construct, the relationship between two construct is called as proposition. In empirical plane, the relationship is called as hypothesis. Correct? Aman, you have a question? No. Similarly, if you get into the variables, so now from concept to construct to variables, we will be largely saying that we have how many variables. Correct? Normally, if you do a PhD or if you do a research project or if you have students who are doing any dissertation or any capstone, generally ask how many variables do you have. And if you go to the classical era, maybe 20, 30, 40 years back, generally people used to have two variables. One is called as dependent, one is called as independent. Correct? And they were generally represented using a regression equation. Correct? So if you have to predict y, you will say there are three x's or only one x. So there can be 1x, 2x, 3x, or one independent, 2, 3, 4. And then whatever thing is not being amounted, or whatever things which has not been given to these independent variables, that goes in the error term. Correct? So generally we have dependent and independent variables. That is something that we should know whenever we are getting into a research. Second kind of variable or second kind of distinction within variable is difference between observed and latent. Observed is any statement, any item which you send it to the researchers, which you share, not the researcher, the participants. So observed are generally called as statements or items or questions, whatever you call it. Latent variable generally is called as construct or bigger variable, correct? And latent variable is nothing but a term which is derived or extracted from the observed variables. Now, this is important that we should understand the meaning of latent, correct? It has some roots in physics, and latent variable means it has been derived. Again, there are two types of latent variable. I will come on to that in the next slide. One is called as formative, second is called as reflective. Similarly, some papers, some articles, some researchers will say that we have some variables which are mediating and moderating. Although in this session or in today's session, we'll not talk about these two terms, but they are also a kind of variable which we try to capture and try to associate in our model. Correct. Now, this is a pictorial representation of what is latent variable and what is observed variable. For instance, happiness becomes a latent variable. Now, I cannot measure happiness straight away by asking, are you happy or do you have happiness? So I generally measure happiness. I told you, it's a construct. Happiness is a construct which has different meaning, different interpretation, different definitions. So I may use 3 set of statements. Somebody may use 5 set of statements. Somebody may use 10 set of statements. So these set of statements will be called as observed variables or statements, and the centered thing which is going to be measured or being reflected by these statements is called as latent variable. Theory, I think, is something which is an interrelation between these concepts and these propositions. So the moment you interrelate, okay, Aman is saying you should go a little slow. Thank you, Aman, for the reminder. Since I assume that the time is a little too less and the topics are little too much, so I was little hurried. Okay, so the term theory means you have some variables and you have some interrelationship between those, and those relationship between those variables, if you want to tag it as a mechanism, as a process, then you call it as a theory. Correct. There are numerous theories all around, and basically theory is nothing but interrelationship between concepts, or you call it as construct, or you call it as variables. And then you have propositions or hypotheses, and concept is nothing but how does a phenomena work. So phenomena is what? Any event or any act. So all these things are derived from one and the other. Similarly, theories are the generalizations about the variables and the relationship. Examples are theory X, theory Y, social cognitive theory. Maybe in marketing you have numerous theories, in HR, in finance, everywhere you have multiple theories. But theories are interrelationship between variables. Now, a model can be little bigger than a theory, slightly broader, slightly wider. Model may have 2 to 3 theories integrated in one model. So in a model, generally in a research model, you have a set of variables. So you will say that there are 5-6 variables. Now I want to see which variable is related to which variable in what way. Is there a direct association? Is there a mediator in between? Is there a moderator in between? Are there multiple independent? Are there multiple dependent? So a researcher generally looks at the problem and try to understand what are the variables which are around that problem. Correct. Now, for example, there is a problem of mental health these days, since most of us are working from home. So if mental health is a problem to understand, then people will say, what are the responsible factors which are hovering around mental health? And then you try to derive relationships. And then you look at the existing literature. And then you say, okay, there are 2, 3, 4 theories which are already been existence. And then I am trying to take something from one theory, something from second, something from third, and then I am creating a larger model. Correct. So model, they differ from theories, as theories play the role of explanation or rationality or reasoning, whereas model is more of a representation. Correct. Model is your own work, your own representation. Theory is your basis, your rationality. Now this is one of the examples. You may have 2, 3 independent, you may have 2 independent, mediating or intervening, and then you may have 1 dependent. Correct. Now normally in hypothesis testing, you look at what kind of variables you have and what kind of scales are being used. I will not get into that, but SEM is largely a tool. Again, this is very important statement that I'm making. SEM is largely a tool which helps us in formulating or testing the relationship between multiple independent and multiple dependent. Correct. The only difference between regression and SEM, regression generally is where there is one dependent, Y, whereas SEM, structural equation model, SEM basically assumes that it can have multiple dependent as well as multiple independent. Is my voice breaking to others also?
No, sir.
It's fine, sir.
I think, Saf, you may check your network connectivity once. So this is the larger difference, correct? Now SEM has got two parts technically. One part is called as CFA and second part is called as path analysis, correct? Why are we saying CFA and path analysis? So it is largely we are working on construct rather than statements. So first of all, we need to check whether our construct is valid and reliable to formulate or to test any given theory, correct? So SEM के अंदर we are doing simultaneously two things. We are checking whether our constructs are robust, whether our constructs are comprehensive, whether they are coherent, and if they are robust, comprehensive, coherent, then whether the relationship between these constructs exist or not. If they exist, what kind of relationship does it? Whether it is direct, whether it is through a mediator, whether it is through a moderator, and so on and so forth. There can be some other multiple mediation, chain mediation, multiple moderation. There can be number of models which can be derived. I think if you are aware about Hayes framework, so Hayes has given a what do you call as plugin which you can process macro, if you are aware of. So there are multiple models which are being established. So you just have to tell the model number. Yes, SPSS, it will automatically run. I think this slide is again very theoretical, fundamental. I can just skip this. So you first get into the questions, then the objective, and then the hypothesis. And finally, we test the hypothesis, and then we make inference, and we try to answer our questions. Again, this is not required. This is also not required. Now this slide is important. Construct, I told you, normally a construct has multi statements, or a construct may have first multi-dimension and then each dimension may have multiple statements. Then you call it as a second order construct, correct? So construct may have 4 or 5 statements, or a construct may have 3 to 4 sub-constructs or sub-dimension, and then each dimension may have multiple statements, correct? So we'll talk about them. How do we name them? What do we call them? But in this slide, I have just written there are some constructs or some variables which are unidimensional. I think this is something that we will not talk about. We will only work upon the constructs which are either multi-statement or multi-dimensional, correct? Where you have more than 2 statements or 2 dimensions. This is an important slide for the beginners who does not know the depth of what is a construct and how does it work. Now, construct basically are a representation of some items. So items manifest, either construct will manifest the items or items will manifest the construct, correct? So it is written, point number 2, items are manifested by the construct or items define the construct. Now there are 2 ways. The difference between these 2 is the flow of causality. For example, I have got 5 statements in one construct or 4 statements in one construct, then how should the causality flow? If the causality is flowing from the construct to the statements, we call it as reflective construct. If the causality is flowing from the statements to the construct, we call it as a formative construct. Any questions so far? Because I have to spend 5 more minutes on this particular point. Any questions so far? I think there is none. Thank you. So anybody who would like to try giving me the difference between these 2, or who is already working on some research papers or research projects where you are using either a formative construct or a reflective construct?
So first one is exploratory and second one is confirmatory factor analysis. In first, there are possibility that there are various other factors. We are just saying that out of one construct, these are the variables. That is exploratory. And the confirmatory is that number of factors has derived and a construct has been created.
Nidhi, you tried, but I am sorry, it is not the right answer.
Sir, the formative construct basically comprises of all the domains which
Hmm.
make that construct, while in a reflective construct, all the items reflect what that construct is. That is
Very
the
good.
major difference between the two of them.
Perfect. Very good. I think you can pat yourself. Nidhi, you have tried to explain it, but see, what I'm saying is, whenever we say reflective construct, that means that construct is in existence. Construct can be stress, construct can be motivation, construct can be learning, construct can be happiness, कुछ भी हो सकता है. So that construct is there, but we are using some statements to measure that construct. So we are trying to draw or map that construct using some items. वो item नहीं भी हैं, still that construct will prevail, still that construct will exist. And within reflective construct, we use both EFA and CFA. EFA का ऑब्जेक्टिव होता है क्रिएटिंग ए कंस्ट्रक्ट, CFA का ऑब्जेक्टिव होता है कंफर्मिंग ए कंस्ट्रक्ट. करेक्ट. So EFA and CFA both can be deployed within reflective itself. Whereas formative के अंदर we are formulating a construct. We are formulating a construct. We say that if these four things happen, then only this will happen. Correct. So the thin line difference between the two is that in reflective, the construct exists even if the statements are not there. And there can be multiple statements. A says that I have statement 1, 2, 3, 4. There is another researcher which is B, which says I have statement 5, 6, 7, 8. Another researcher says I have another statement. So construct है वो. जैसे मैंने बोला happiness is there, but there can be 10 different authors with 10 different set of statements and measuring happiness only. So happiness is there, but how do you measure is basically you are reflecting upon it. Formative के अंदर you are, even if you delete one item, the essence will be lost. अगर मेरे पास 4 statements हैं and these 4 statements together are formulating a construct. Correct. For example, अगर मुझे एक सर्विस डिलीवरी या एम्प्लॉय एक्सपीरियंस की बात करनी हो, सो कुछ चीजें ऐसी होंगी जो एक्सपीरियंस होने के बाद एग्जिबिट करेगा वो आदमी. करेक्ट. सो एनीथिंग, इफ यू लुक एट नॉर्मल स्टेटमेंट, आई फील दिस, आई डू दिस. सो जो आई डू का मतलब है ना, जहां पर हम लोग बात कर रहे हैं प्रेजेंट इंडेफिनिट टेंस के अंदर, तो वो चीजें ऐसी हैं दैट द थिंग्स दैट पर्सन विल डू, सो दे आर जस्ट टू मेजर द रिफ्लेक्शन ऑन दैट पर्टिकुलर थिंग. Whereas formulative में you have a different set of question. Correct. And the difference basically, if you want to read more, I can share a paper. I think I've shared a paper in the previous session also. So that paper talks about very minute difference between these two terms. I think in the coming slides, if I tell you, for example, this slide, is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So here what I'm saying is रिफ्लेक्टिव वर्सेस फॉर्मेटिव. सो रिफ्लेक्टिव को हम स्केल बोल रहे हैं, फॉर्मेटिव को इंडेक्स बोल रहे हैं. करेक्ट. ऑपरेशनलाइजेशन. सो ए कंस्ट्रक्ट, इफ यू लुक एट द फर्स्ट डायमेंशन वेयर द एरोज आर गोइंग आउट, it is called as reflective. So changes in the latent variable directly causes changes in the indicator. So अगर मेरी हैप्पीनेस कम होगी ना, तो मैं उन स्टेटमेंट्स के ऊपर आंसर या आगे दूंगा या कम दूंगा. If I am highly stressed, तो my responses on those statements will vary. करेक्ट. सो कंस्ट्रक्ट के ऊपर जो मेरा एटीट्यूड है, दैट एटीट्यूड विल चेंज ऑन द रिस्पॉन्सेज ऑफ द आइटम. whereas here it is other way. If I change the response on these items, the construct will change. Now let me go to the next point, next slide. Can you see this slide? Drunkardness.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Now there are 3 statements. One is smells of alcohol, can't walk a straight line, slurred speech. Now if somebody has, I'm sharing, Dr. Mahmood, I'm sharing, very good. So I'm saying that these are the 3 statements. Now if I ask somebody these 3 statements, will it become a formative or reflective? Tell me.
Reflective, sir.
Reflective.
Reflective. And if I use this, next point, consumption of beer, consumption of wine, consumption of hard liquor.
Formative.
Did you get the difference? So अगर मैं तीनों का consumption नहीं कर रहा हूं तो मैं drunk नहीं हूं. If I am, even if I may have a fourth thing also, I may have fifth thing also, if I am using a reflective scale. Did you get it? So drunkardness के जो बाद की चीजें हैं, if I am drunk or if I am happy, let us not talk about drink and alcohol. Let's talk about things which are rather positive. So if there is a happiness, so after being happy, whatever things I exhibit, if I measure those, then it is called as reflective. In order to be happy, whatever things I do, if I measure those, then it is called as formative. I think there is another example written here. Religiosity. Religious होने से पहले, in the second point, if you look at, if I am visiting the temple or gurdwara or mosque or any other religious place, then I am supposed to be religious and I am measuring it through formative. But if I exhibit those things which a religious person generally exhibits, a belief, a devotion, a ritual or something, then it is formative. Did you get it? So if I now ask you, is it visible, this slide?
Yes, sir.
Satisfaction with
sir.
hotels. Now if you have understood it, there are about 1 2 3 4 5 plus 5 10 plus 2 12. So out of these 12 statements, now you tell me, if I have to measure the satisfaction with hotels, which statement will become a formative and which statement will become a reflective? Any guess? और फॉर्मेटिव और इस पे मैं क्यों एम्फसाइज कर रहा हूं? बिकॉज रिफ्लेक्टिव कंस्ट्रक्ट के अंदर हम यूज करेंगे एमएस, फॉर्मेटिव पे हम करेंगे
Formative. This will be formative.
All are formative, all 12 items are formative.
So like, so can I say something?
Yeah, Dr. Reena, please go ahead.
Yeah, for example, the rooms furnishings are good. The hotel's personnel are friendly. The hotel's recreation offerings are good. I think all this is reflective.
Good. All this is reflective or formative? Confusion. There is still a confusion.
Formative, so formative.
Reflective means after being satisfied, whatever I do, correct? Reflective. So अगर मैं satisfied हूँ, तो how will I reflect my satisfaction? I will say, yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, I appreciate this hotel. It's a reflective.
Absolutely, Dr. Subhash, absolutely. I appreciate, I am reflecting upon my satisfaction. Similarly, I am comfortable with these services. Similarly, there can be a statement,
Yes,
I am looking
sorry, sir.
forward to stay overnight. So whatever feelings, whatever reflection, the term itself says reflection. So whatever I am reflecting after experiencing that phenomena, after experiencing that concept or construct, the moment I am satisfied, I will reflect. और उसको होने के लिए क्या होना चाहिए? In order to be satisfied, the furnishing must be good, the personnel must be friendly, the rooms should be good decorated, the cuisine should be good, so the price should be. So ideally, these 4 statements are reflective or formative?
Formative, sir, formative.
फिर गलत बोल रहे हो. Reena, again wrong.
Sir, these are reflective. Sir,
So
all
the
are
rooms-
reflective.
These 4 are reflective. Reena, confusion कहाँ है? Is it the
No,
vocabulary
sir.
or?
Yeah. So please
Yeah.
repeat once again.
I am saying these 4 are reflective. After being satisfied, I reflect my satisfaction in these 4 ways. So if you go and ask somebody these 4 statements, that means you are using a reflective construct. And these 4 statements, if I add a couple more statements, or if I replace one with another, hardly there is any difference. But formative के अंदर it is not the same. Formative के अंदर I am saying कि these 4 things are formulating a construct. these, अगर rooms clean नहीं होगा तो मैं satisfy कभी नहीं होऊंगा, correct? But these 4 you can interchange them, you can add 2 more, add 3 more, correct? But formatting it is difficult, so adding one more or deleting one will have a huge impact. Here it will have negligible impact. Did you get it?
Okay, sir. Okay.
So now you look at this, the arrow ka dekho aap, the flow of the arrow. If it is flowing from the statement to the construct, it is formative. If it is flowing from the construct to the statement, it is reflective. Now, if somebody has worked upon AMOS, if you know the software AMOS, SPSS का जो byproduct है, most of the time, always the construct will have the arrows from the construct to the statements. So in AMOS, we make the reflective constructs. In PLSM, we make up. People at times generally go by their convenience. They feel PLSM the conditions are less tough, because PLSM you need not to check the normality or linearity or data size. A lot of assumptions are slightly easy. So people generally go for PLSM without even knowing the flow of the causality. You should first of all know where is the causality flowing from. If it is flowing from the construct to the items, and you can make it when you read the statements. If I show you 2, 3, 4 similar kinds of example, then you will be very, very strong. The moment you read the statements, you can make it out कि भाई ये तो formative है, ये reflective नहीं है, correct? And reflective को scale बोलते हैं normally, formative को index बोलते हैं, ठीक है? Am I making sense? Now, if I go back to the previous slide, so if you have a multi-dimensional construct, and by construct I am saying latent variable. Latent का मतलब which is been formulated by a set of statements. ठीक है? Now, if you look at point number 2 once again, items are manifested by the construct or items define the construct. The moment item defines the construct, it becomes formative. The moment you say items are manifested by the construct, it becomes reflective. Shall I move on?
Participants, please say.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, let's get on to the criteria to measure or criteria to say that our construct is robust, our construct is fair, our construct is good. So there are 3 criteria. I think theoretically all of you are aware of what is reliability, what is validity, what is sensitivity. I will not talk about them. But for people who work upon reflective constructs, they are mostly concerned about something called as construct validity. You can see point number 3 under validity. Now, validity basically means whatever I intend to measure is being measured. ठीक है ना? It has multiple subcomponents. Face validity is a subset of content which is not written. So content may you look at the literature, you look at the existing theories, you look at the statements and their formulation and much more. Dr. Mahbub, you can ask your question. I have to go back. Mahmood, Dr. Mahmood, if you have something to ask, you please ask. Should I read out whatever he has written? Sir, for reflective constructs, whatever we experience only can be a variable. We cannot add furthermore. Mahmood, you can add. Dekho, there are two thoughts again. One school of thought says that if I am using a standardized scale, if I am using a already created instrument, then if I add something, the person may feel offended that I have created a questionnaire which has 20 items. Now, why are you using 22, 23? But if I am asking 2 more statements, what is the harm? I want to be very, very sure, because if you say that in the foreign context, these are the 5 statements which measure tangibility. But in Indian context, tangibility means one more statement. Dr. Mahmood, can I add one more statement or not? And if I add, what is the harm? I don't think there is a harm. The person may feel bad that he will say that you have spoiled my, or somebody may ask, what is the rationality? But while deleting, you may have to again, in both the cases, the rationality has to be there. When will you delete a statement? Correct. Now, the entire discussion that we will have in the next 2 to 3 hours will be around the reflective constructs. Reflective construct is an instrument, a scale, which is already there normally, correct, until you are using an EFA and creating an instrument on your own. So reflective ka matlab, there is already an instrument which is been formulated by somebody and which is helping you to move ahead. So what can we do? The objective of the study is to make sure that our responses are in line with what is expected. The expected thing was to measure the tangibility, but people are replying on something which is very, very global, or people have no, what do you call as, difference in their responses. So they are globally answering everything. So for every statement, they are saying 4, 5, 5, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, correct? So our question is that whether the construct that we have has convergence and discriminant. Convergence means if there are 5 statements, 4 statements, 10 statements, all of them should converge into one hypothetical variable, which is the latent variable. And if there are multiple sub-variables, then they should have some difference in those. So we are more interested in knowing the convergent and discriminant validity rather than the criteria or the content, correct, in the reflective constructs. And reliability ke andar, if you know, this slide also talks about there are 3 ways to measure reliability. One is test retest, second is equivalent form, and third is internal consistency. And because of the time constraint, because of the other barriers or bottlenecks, we generally rely upon internal consistency reliability using Cronbach alpha. There is no harm in using Cronbach alpha, but if you are using the software called as AMOS, then there is a term called as CR. CR can be, we call it either as composite reliability or construct reliability at times, correct? So rather than reporting only the alpha values, we report CR value, composite reliability. And generally it is said that the scores of CRs are slightly higher than the scores of alpha, correct? And then we look at the sensitivity, and I think these are very theoretical things. We have to ensure that we capture all 3 things: validity, reliability, and sensitivity. Yes, Dr. Reena, you have a question.
Sir, can you please explain the difference between composite reliability and internal consistency reliability?
Okay, let me tell you from the statistical point of view. Okay? In both these, what is assumed? You have a set of statements and you believe that the consistency in responses is there, correct? So in order to measure the consistency, you create a hypothetical latent variable, and then you try to figure out what percentage of that latent variable is explaining the statement, correct? And then you also look at what is the left out, what is the residual. So in both the cases, we try to reduce the error, the residual. But in the alpha, the assumption is that each statement has equal or equivalent factor loading with the latent variable, correct? For example, 5 statements hain under one construct called as creativity. Creativity is being measured by 5 statements. So what we are doing at the back end, we are saying कि creativity की 5 statement और जो construct बनाया हमने hypothetical creativity, हम 5 statements और उसके बीच में relationship निकाल रहे हैं, और उसके बीच में एक beta values होंगी हर एक की, correct? If that construct can predict 5 statements, so there has to be a beta value. So उस केस के अंदर अल्फा के अंदर all those loading or beta values are assumed to be equal, whereas in composite reliability we can see their beta values because the software can give us slightly more in depth, and in that we have a chance to reduce or eliminate one of the statements. If that statement is having lower beta value, we can eliminate it. Correct. So थोड़ा सा preciseness better है CR की in comparison to alpha. Alpha से preciseness ज़्यादा है because it is measuring the actual beta and actual error and then calculating the construct reliability or composite reliability, whereas that is assuming that all betas are same in alpha. करेक्ट. सो उसमें बीटा सेम मानते हैं, इसमें थोड़ा थोड़ा बीटा का फर्क होता है. सो बेसिकली द प्रिसाइसनेस गोज अप इन सीआर. करेक्ट.
Okay, sir.
But both are the measure of internal consistency only. Both measure the consistency. ठीक है. I think these are theoretical things I can skip. Or should I tell you about these definitions? Anybody who says that I should talk about these terms? These are very fundamental things. Reliability is a tendency that you respond the same thing again and again in the similar way. And then I've said the best way to measure reliability is go for the test again and again and again. So you do that 5 times, and if every time the responses are same, it is good. But construct के अंदर हम लोग check कर रहे हैं construct की reliability. That is different than the reliability of the entire questionnaire. So उस construct के अंदर कितनी consistency है, कितनी coherence है, and we use different methods. Correct. Split off is one of the common method that is being used normally. So it uses multiple iterations, splits the statements and try to find out how are they explaining the latent variable. Now shall we move on to the SPSS and do how do we calculate reliability, and then we go on to AMOS, or we should know first of all these concepts a little more in depth? Guys, tell me, you want hands-on or you want the theoretical input for another 5 minutes? Other than Reena, Dr. Reena, anybody else? Because initially people said, yes, it is important to know the theory behind all these terms. There is hardly any response, so I think I should use my own judgment. Sonal again says, sir, theory first. So Sonal, there is no much theory. So basically what I have said in the previous slide, I am explaining them in the upcoming slides. So I am basically saying in validity, I look for 3 things. Content says the literature, the aesthetic part, the statement creation, the meaning and the significance, the kind of leading statements, loaded statements, so a lot of other things. We measure it, and this is largely done subjectively. And criteria के लिए you have to have a dependent variable. So criteria validity, if you know, the term says that the criteria that you are using to measure any construct, and if it is predicting something, and if I use any other criteria, so it should be able to predict that. Correct. So in the criteria validity, you have 2 kinds of validity. Are you aware of that? In criteria, I am basically saying, let me show you the PPT also, hold on. So criteria validity basically says it's about operationalization of construct, and it says that if a construct can predict another theoretical construct, so if I change that construct or if I use a different method, it should be able to predict it in the same way. So prediction दो तरह का होगा. One is the concurrent prediction and second is the predictive, which is in the future. So you may check concurrent validity or you may check predictive validity, but that will only come when you have a dependent variable or another variable which you are trying to predict using the first variable. Correct. So एक करोगे आप on the same time, एक आप करोगे maybe in the future, after 3 months, after 1 month, after 6 months. So normally this is something that we will not cover in this discussion, but this is also being done, and these are largely done when you create or formulate an instrument. So when you say that I am formulating a questionnaire or instrument, then it is largely advised that you go for all 4 kinds of validity. Correct. But if you are going for a reflective construct, then you generally look for, most important is the construct. So then you will not go for the criteria validity. So you will not even go for content, you will go for the construct. ठीक है, content, criteria, construct तीनों जरूरी हैं. But if you are creating an instrument, you go for all three. But if you already have an instrument which is there, then you look for the construct. Construct का मतलब कि my respondents are agreeing to what my assumptions are. ठीक है. Reliability के अंदर I have told you these two are very cumbersome, very time consuming, test, retest and equivalent form, whereas internal consistency is used for the reflective constructs. So we will talk about one, internal consistency, and second, construct validity. So these two using SPSS and AMOS. Correct. Now what I do is I share a data file with all of you. I think we can take a break of 5 minutes, and in that I can just share the data file on which I will work. It's an SPSS file. Dr. Saab, I should mail you.
Yes. Regarding?
Yesterday, I am mailing you an SPSS data file, which I will be using after 5 minutes. So if you can share that with.
Yes. Please mail me.
So whose ID should I mail? Can I?
I'm writing here. Wait.
Yeah. If you do not receive the data file, don't worry. Data file will be required in the second session. In the first session, I will tell you how does AMOS work, what are the systems, what are the different layout and options do we have. Did you type that? Can
Yes,
I
sir.
add that Excel file here? Ritu is saying you can put it on chat box. Ritu, can I upload the SPSS file on chat box? I don't think so.
No, we cannot do that.
I don't think so. So I have to email it to Dr. Jamshed and he can share it with all the participants.
We have already dedicated WhatsApp group. So those
Okay,
who have
you will
not,
share.
Yeah, I will share over there. Please give it to me.
You just share your email ID so that I can. I don't know whether I can share it on WhatsApp. I have your WhatsApp number. Let me try that. If I can share it on your WhatsApp straight away. Others can take 2 minutes break.
Yeah, I have given email ID. You please send it to me. I will do the rest.
Chaliye, thank you, Dr. Saab. It is an SCV file, demo file.scv. I have just sent it. May I know how many of you are familiarized with SPSS? You know a lot of SPSS. At least you know how do we calculate the value of alpha, because that is something that we have just discussed. Cronbach alpha. If you can raise your hand, I think I can see 1, 2 hands. Nidhi says yes, 4, 5. How many of you know the basic statistical functions on SPSS? For example, calculating frequencies, creating some charts, doing t-test, ANOVA, simple regression. Good, good. Fine. Now, if I ask you the question, how many of you have seen the AMOS interface? If you can put your hands down once, and just only those hands should be up who have seen the interface of AMOS. Only 5, 6. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 out of almost 100. I don't know whether all of you are active or not, but whosoever is active, 8 of you have said that you have seen. Shantanu says with only few that we mostly use. Shantanu, what does it mean? Shantanu? Because I genuinely want all of you to do it along with me. If I tell you, instruct you, you write it, then you will definitely forget. So the objective is to get an hands-on experience on SPSS and AMOS, and SPSS basic things you already know. Shantanu, I still did not gather what are you trying to say. If you can just pick up and tell me. Chali, I hope he is there. Have you received that sheet? Have you received that SPSS file? Chali, I will not work upon that file as of now. Before that, I will just share the AMOS window and tell you how do we work upon. I hope all of you have installed or at least have the trial version of AMOS. And let me open it and share my screen once. AMOS will never work without an SPSS file. The entire data is in SPSS file, and if you are aware, SPSS was initially a plugin in SPSS. So AMOS was a plugin, a small function, because it has multiple utilities. So the creators have created a full version of SPSS and full version of AMOS. Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
All of you, if you have an access to AMOS, you can also open. Now, if you look at the screen, there are largely 3 parts. In the center, you see a canvas where we do entire drawing and plotting these constructs, and which we can copy paste. And on the left hand side, there are 2 different, you call as sections. The first section is the buttons which we will use to make our operations. The second part largely does not work, does not require as of now any attention except a couple of things. So should I tell you each of these tabs, each of these buttons, and then move on? One thing that I'm doing as of now is I am increasing the size of this canvas. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking on view, I'm saying interface properties, and I'm going on to page layout and page size. If you can see this. So in page size, I am just increasing it to maybe landscape A4 and apply. Now you look at this canvas, the white part in the center. It has gone slightly bigger. Correct. Now this is the canvas on which we'll work. I think somebody's mic is on. Pankaj ji?
Pankaj, please mute yourself.
I think sir, the dialog boxes were not visible because I think only the window has been shared.
Which dialog box you are seeing?
You were doing some changes in the.
Yeah, I am basically doing one small change that we should do. I am basically going. So dialog box is not visible. I think I have to share my entire screen. I got your point.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Good. Thank you for the suggestion. I'm again stop sharing and then we'll share the screen rather than one window. Now, is it visible?
Yes, sir.
So basically what I have done is, if you look at the top tabs, you have file from where you can open a new file, you can save, you can impute, you can do a lot of other functions, and it shows you the last 5-6 files that you might have opened at the bottom. You can print, you can browse diagrams. Most of the functions are known to most of us. Correct. So you can press Control N also for a new. You can click here also. You will have a new file. Correct. New with a template. So if you already have a template, you want to follow. Generally, people avoid it. If you want to open an existing file, if you want to retrieve a backup file, normally we use new, open, save, or save as. Correct. And then data files if you have attached to it. In the edit, you have largely the same buttons which you can see on the left hand side. The extreme left hand side, you can see there are a set of buttons. You can see a triangle, an ellipse, a construct, some arrows, title, some boxes, some hands, finger, truck, circle. A lot of buttons are there. Correct. So all these buttons are also repeated. Most of them are in the edit button. And a few extra, if you can see, there are some links which are activated, like copied to clipboard, link, move. So as and when we require their usage, we will talk about them. View ke andar, as I was telling, that you have 3, 4, 5 options which are good. So normally we use interface properties. So interface properties ke andar I can change the margins of the canvas. I can change the paper size. I can change the height and the width. I can use inches, centimeter, and I can use colors and much more things. Correct. Display variable name, a lot of other things we can use. Some of them are useful, some of them are not required as of now. But in the paper size, what I have done initially, it was only portrait letter. So if I say portrait letter, it becomes very small. Correct. Can you see that at the back? This white canvas is becoming small. So if I use it landscape A4, it becomes slightly bigger, so that all my constructs can be easily fitted into here. Correct. So I've just done that one change as of now. Now, if you look at, there is 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, and there are multiple rows. Every button has a usage, an application, and the most common buttons, I will give you the familiarity. And the most common which are required for today's session. There are certain things, for example, mediation, moderation, and other things which you may do in the coming sessions, maybe tomorrow or day after. So most important buttons that we have largely are, if I say column 1, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So column 1, 8th row. The moment you put your cursor on this, it says select data file. So this is something that we have to begin with. Correct. Since I told you AMOS alone is good for nothing, you have to work along with an SPSS file. So every time you attach a file, you have to use this button. Correct. So C1 and row 8. Correct. Similarly, next to it is the button where you tell the commands. Analyze property. It is similar button which is analysis tab in SPSS. If you know the SPSS tab, so there is an analysis button at the top which is required to do multiple operations. And the third is just to run. So it is a run button. It will calculate all your estimates. If you create a model, you have told what are the output that you required, you just click on this. So third column and 8th. So 3, 8. Correct. These three are most important buttons to me, because one is to import or select a data file. The second one is to, if you click on this, you will find there are multiple things. Estimation multiple methods are there. So MLE method is generally used. GLS भी है, WLS भी है, scale free भी है. So normally we go for MLE method, maximum likelihood. Then numerical के अंदर there are multiple options. Similarly bias, output. I'm not sure about all of them, and neither we use most of them for the session that we have today, because in this session we will be talking about two things that I have told you. One is the validity part, and validity के अंदर भी construct validity, and reliability के अंदर composite reliability. So these two things we generally require to verify any construct. Correct. So this is a button. I will tell you which one to press and when. And the third, there is no sub button. Once there is a data file, once you have created, plotted the model, once you have completed the model by all means, then you press on this calculate estimate. Correct. At the top you can see C1. You can draw observed variables. Now before I go into this, there are a few rules that we should know. I think I have talked about some of them, but let me go into the PPT and correct. So is this slide visible? Working on AMOS analysis. So the full form of AMOS is analysis of moment structure. So basically in the structure, basically the model is called a structure here. So whatever moments are there in the structure or in the model that you create, so it analyzes all those moments. Based upon those moments, it makes all the predictions. Somebody's microphone is on. Please turn it off.
लेकिन इसमें क्या है, इसमें टेस्ट भी देना पड़ेगा क्या, कि कोई प्रेजेंटेशन भी देने?
Swati Yadav, if you can mute yourself.
Miss Swati, please mute yourself. Miss Swati.
1450 रुपए वो हमसे नौटंकी ना कराओ, कुछ लिख के दो. ये
Can we mute her from outside?
मेहनत ना कराओ किसी चीज.
Or we remove this person.
टेलीग्राम पे ग्रुप में भेजा है.
Swati Yadav, please mute yourself.
इसमें रजिस्ट्रेशन कैसे करें?
होगा ना इसमें.
Miss Swati Yadav, please mute yourself.
इसमें नहीं दिया है.
Rahul, can you eliminate her?
Sir, the organizer can mute it from their end.
Absolutely, somebody can do that, or you can at least remove this person if he is not countable.
अरे उससे तो इसका वो लिख के.
Dr. Jamshed sir, please remove him or her.
बोल रही है सर.
Chaliye, done. Thank you Swati, but it was a big disturbance. So I was just telling you some of the ground rules to work upon this software AMOS. the first thing that I've said is the full form of AMOS is analysis of moment structure. Correct. So whatever movements are there in the entire moment, it kinds of captures and analyze those, and based upon that, it compares the models, and then it predicts multiple things. So what are the things that we need to know before we start working on this software called as AMOS? We should know how do we define the observed and latent variables, right? So as I've told you in the beginning, we will always have the statements that will call or put under observed. So if I click on this, now I can draw one observed variable in the form of rectangle. Okay, so whenever I draw a rectangle, that means I am drawing an observed variable, and if I do Control Z, I can undo my things. Latent variable is generally represented by eclipse. So the moment I put an eclipse, and an eclipse will always have rectangles associated to it. An eclipse will never come in isolation, because eclipse means it is an latent variable. So latent variable, if you draw until you tell the software that this latent variable is being manifested by these statements, it will not work. So rather than you drawing eclipse and latent and then connecting them with the arrows, so there is a third button. This is drawing a construct. So if I press and create an eclipse, and if I put the cursor again, and if I click on tab, it will create multiple observed variables, multiple rectangles. Correct. So if I have to maybe draw it in a little center, again I select it, it should be visible. Can you see that? Correct. So if I click on once, it will add one rectangle. Along with each rectangle, there will be a small circle or an ellipse, which is generally referred as an error term. Now, if I look at this diagram, it is basically a regression equation, isn't it? This is a regression equation. Now, somebody has to tell me why is it a regression equation? And if it is a regression equation, what is y and what is x and what is error?
Sir, would you please repeat? I was unable to see.
I'm just saying that in this diagram, I'm saying there's a regression equation which is hidden. So what is the regression equation?
So
Independent variables.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, there is one independent and one dependent variable, and circle is the beta value.
Circle is the beta value. No. अच्छा अभी बताओ. Now there are two circles, two rectangles, and one circle. Now is it a regression equation?
Sir, one dependent variable and two independent variables.
Who is this person saying? Look at the direction of the arrows. Manisha or Divya, whosoever was talking. Look at the direction of the arrow. If the arrow starts from the rectangle and goes into this, and second arrow starts from here and goes into this, then these two would have been independent and this eclipse would have been dependent. But it is other way around. Here there are two regression equations as of now, and in both the regression equation, dependent variables are these two rectangles, independent is the same, this eclipse is independent, and this is an error. Should I repeat?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, please repeat.
If I delete this, correct? As of now, arrow कहाँ जा रहे हैं? Direction of the arrow. So arrow will always move from independent to dependent. ठीक है? So अगर मैं, if I give it a name, maybe let me just right click on this object properties. If I give it a name, so I say A, or I say X, and I say it again Y, correct? And error को मैं नाम दे देता हूँ E1. अभी के लिए if you know x, y and e1, so from where the अभी e को छोड़ दो, this is an error term, ठीक है, we'll talk about it separately. So between x and y, what is the association? Is x predicting y or y predicting x? ये नंबर एक तो मुझे बताओ कि ये कौन सा वाला कंस्ट्रक्ट है, is it formative or reflective? If I add maybe one more or two more, is it formative or reflective?
Sir, it's reflective.
Correct. If you go back and look at this diagram, is it reflective?
Yes, sir.
Very good. So reflective है, which means which is dependent now, x or y?
Sir, x is independent and y and other rectangles, they are
Correct.
dependent.
Very good. So this y is dependent. Similarly, you can say this is y2. Similarly, if I click on this rectangle, I can name it as y3. And if I go back on this, I can say y1. Did you get it? So there is one way which I can use is to E3 or E2 करना है मुझे इधर. Correct. Now there are three regression equations. Many times we make a mistake. We say it's a multiple regression and these three are independent. Y1, Y2, Y3 and X is dependent. So अभी हमको उल्टा समझना है इसको. Correct. So X is independent. We are predicting Y through X. And whatever X cannot predict goes into the error. Did you get it? So we are predicting Y1 through X. Whatever X cannot predict, it gets predicted by something else which is accounted for error 1. For example, अगर हम happiness को measure कर रहे हैं and I write one statement here, Y1 as a statement, that I start my day with joy, and here it is happiness. So I start my day with joy may have multiple reasons. One of the reasons or one of the independent variable can be I am inherently happy. If that is the reason, then it is okay. But if there are other reasons, they go accounted in the error. Did you get it? Similarly, there is another statement that every task I complete with a feeling of satisfaction. Again, I am trying to predict it through X. Similarly, there is another statement. Did you get it? So here you have got three regression equations, each with have same independent but different dependent variables and different error terms. Correct? This is what we call as a construct in AMOS. Am I making sense? Now let us go back and delete this. So now there is a button called as in the third column 1 2 3 4 5. So इसको मैं A और इसको B और इसको C बोल रहा हूँ. C5 there is a button called as cross. इसके ऊपर जब टैप करेंगे it says erase object. So if I click on this, I can delete or erase anything. Now you can again erase. Correct. ठीक है जी. But in case I want to use these arrows, one dimensional जो arrow है, that means there is a regression, or in AMOS language we call it as path analysis. The moment we have got two dimensional error, we are either measuring the covariance or correlation. ठीक है. Two dimensional arrow will measure the correlation, one dimensional arrow will measure the regression for a layman. And this is basically just to add an error term. If I have created a simple box, so I can use this just to add an error term here. Now if I go back to the assumptions or the prerequisites, first point says you have to define the observed and the latent variable. That means you have to draw a complete construct. Second point says the direction of the arrow. It will always be from independent to dependent. अब उसके अंदर भी मैंने जो बताया आपको, so x से y के अंदर जा रही है तो independent क्या है और dependent क्या है. Third compulsion here is, or third rule of AMOS is that you will always have an error term associated with the dependent variable. क्योंकि independent alone cannot predict the dependent. There will always be something which left unpredicted by the independent. So dependent variable जहाँ पर भी होगा, if you look at this, इसको मैं अगर दोबारा से इरेज कर देता हूँ, एंड इफ आई ड्रॉ ए कंस्ट्रक्ट, so by default, if I just click this, so by default it will give an error term because ये dependent बन रहा है बीच वाला rectangle, this is an independent, so with every dependent यहाँ पर लिखा है error term associated with every dependent variable, जब भी आपका dependent variable बन रहा है उसके साथ में एक error term आएगी। error का मतलब एक छोटा सा सर्कल और यहाँ पर एक एरो होगा और यहाँ पर 1 हमेशा लिखना है और वो ऑटोमेटिक लिखा आएगा। 1 इज द रिग्रेशन वेट, सो वी आर अज्यूमिंग कि उसका रिग्रेशन वेट 1 है, करेक्ट। सो every dependent will have an error term, along with that there is an regression weight of 1. The difference between regression and AMOS, yes.
Actually, I have a question. That
Please.
Sometimes it is very confusing to identify the item we are measuring on Likert scale or construct we are measuring on Likert scale. That whether we should we should consider it as a observed variable or a latent variable, or we should use a circle for that or rectangle.
What is the difficulty, Vandana?
That the thing that we are measuring any construct on Likert scale. So Likert scale में जब हमको
हाँ बोलो
जी सर, यही था question.
I am again repeating, Vandana ji, that if I am measuring any variable using Likert scale, Likert ने क्या बोला था? Francis Likert has said that if you are asking a point more than 3 different ways and you sum it, that is why it is called a summated scale, or you take an average of it, and if the responses are at par or similar, close to each other, then you call it as a Likert scale. So Likert का मतलब है कि there is a construct at the back. अगर आप उसको एक ही स्टेटमेंट में पूछ रहे हो, then it does not become a construct which you can use in AMOS. अगर आपके क्वेश्चनर के अंदर कोई ऐसी चीज है जो फॉर एग्जांपल आपका डेमोग्राफी है, एज, जेंडर, वो तो लिकट है नहीं ना, वो स्केल ही नहीं है, दे आर बेसिक इंफॉर्मेशन। अगर आपके पास कोई ऐसी आइटम है, देखो हम बात कर रहे हैं, अगेन आई हैव टोल्ड यू इन द बिगिनिंग दैट इट इज इंपॉर्टेंट टू अंडरस्टैंड द डिफरेंस बिटवीन यूनी डायमेंशनल एंड मल्टी डायमेंशनल। सो एमएस की जरूरत जब पड़ेगी हमारे को, जब हमारे पास मल्टीपल स्टेटमेंट्स होंगी। whenever we have a single statement representing a construct, so that statement itself becomes a construct. So we should not use AMOS for that, because there you are not, that is so उस केस में हम AMOS यूज नहीं करेंगे।
Suppose I am measuring OCB, organizational citizenship behavior, and I have taken like 10 items for it.
एलन मेयर का आपने स्केल यूज किया मान लिया, हाँ।
Yes. So whether if we are consider it latent variable,
देखो अभी OCB के अंदर अगर आप कह रहे हो कि OCB के अंदर 10 हैं, so all those 10 statements are observed. उन 10 statements का एक मीनिंग है। Again I am saying latent variable is hidden, latent heat सब hidden होते हैं, दिखते नहीं है ये, neither you can, हाँ। So latent variable will not ask somebody directly. Latent variable is a hidden variable which is present in their cognition, which is present in their mind. If they have that in their mind, then on these 10 items the response will be like this. 10 statements के अंदर आपको latent कहीं नहीं है, latent आपको यहाँ बनाना है, you have to draw latent here. 10 variables का एक score बनेगा, then you can impute the values of a latent variable. If you know EFA a bit, तो आप एक फैक्टर बना रहे हो। देखो the best way is आपका 10 आइटम है, you take an average of 10 and you say it is a latent variable, है ना? सबसे आसान तरीका तो यही है। 10 आइटम आपने किसी से और आप कहते हो कि 10 आइटम रिप्रेजेंट करती हैं OCB को, and if I take an average of all 10 it is OCB, ऐसे ही करते लोग 10-20 साल पहले. But now the question is that out of those 10 items, which item is important, which item is less important, which item is explaining what percentage of OCV. If I have, I think there is a lot of noise. Who is?
Can you mute yourself?
Vandana is there. Vandana is okay. I think there is somebody else other than Vandana. So Vandana, I am saying that the things were so easy. If we can take an average of 10 statements and say this is my latent variable, which is the average of 10. Kaam khatam. But now I did not check the validity of the construct. I did not check the reliability of the construct. I simply took an average of 10 statements and I simply said that this is a latent variable. So that is not the right approach. The right approach is to understand that out of these 10 statements, is there a statement which is not explaining any variance in the latent variable? Latent is nothing but an hypothetical variable that is running at the back. Is there any statement which is not at all, or is there any statement which needs modification? Correct. Or within those statements, can there be 3 subcategories? These 3 statements are a subcategory of OCV. These 3 are second subcategory. These 3 are subcategory. So I may have to do all that. So I cannot then simply presume that there is a questionnaire which has 10 statements और हमारे डेटा पे वो 10 fit हो गई. So I cannot assume. I have to go through the confirmatory factor analysis because that questionnaire is there, but my data, whether that data is confirming वो factor बन रहा है कि नहीं बन रहा, I have to use CFA. और CFA का सबसे important part होता है convergent and discriminant validity.
Yes sir.
यार तो वो हमें करना पड़ेगा, तो हमें confusion नहीं होनी चाहिए माइंड में. हमारा latent variable बाद में बनेगा. Latent, अगर हम latent को पूछ रहे हैं तो वो latent है ही नहीं. If we are asking a question, it is observed.
Okay.
हाँ, whatever we are asking is observed. So anything we are not asking becomes latent. ठीक है जी?
Yes.
चलिए, thank you. I hope I have clarified doubt for others also.
Yes.
Now, if you look at the column 1, row 2, explained you. Single dimension, two-sided arrow, one-sided arrow, and an arrow term. Here you have very simple things. If you want to give a title to your figure or you want to give caption, you can use this. These two are the buttons to show what are the variables that you have. In the third column, in C3, it shows you the variables in the data file. In B3, it shows you the variable which are in the model. So in the data file, you may have more variables. In the model which you have created on this canvas, you may have less number of variables. Correct. So once we import the data file, I will only click. Abhi मैं click करूँगा तो you will see a pop-up, but it has got nothing because there is no data file associated. Correct. Similarly, if I click here, I will again get nothing. These are the button to select and unselect. So single pointed arrow, selecting one object at a time, all objects, and this is to deselect. Correct. So if I have to select something and draw covariance or draw something, so I will use single, what do you call as pointed arrow, or I can select all and create some covariances and etc. I'll tell you how do we use these select and unselect. And then there is a radio button you can see. This is to create a duplicate object. For example, I have created a construct having 4 statements and I want to create a duplicate of this. So I will just click on this. But before clicking this, now if I drag this, I can extract whatever I can. Can you see that? So wherever I am putting my cursor, so any of the box or circle I can extract out. But इसका कोई फायदा नहीं है until there is a button called as preserve symmetry. If you look at C 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 C10. So you have to click this button called as C10 preserve symmetry. So if I click on this preserve symmetry, so now if I use radio button, so this entire construct will come out like this. I can extract another construct like this. Correct. So preserve symmetry is an intelligent tab that you can continue to be remain on activated mode. So after duplicate key, you have a button called as move objects. So if you click on this, and if you want to move it, you can move it. Correct. This button I've already told you, C4 to erase, to delete. Now this is to change the shape. So if I click on this, and if I want to make it small, big, and all that, so I can reshape my boxes and clips or circles. Now this is important. This is used to rotate the entire construct. So if I click on this, I can just rotate. Correct. You can see it will rotate at 90 degree at once. This is basically to reflect. It will just do the other way around. So it will just create a reflection. So it is again actually rotating, but it is rotating exactly 180 degree rather than 90, 90, 90, 90. ठीक है ना? If you write some variable name, then it will change their sequence also. It will reciprocate the sequence. Although these are all blank, so you are not able to see that. So although there are not much of the advantages, but at times they are very handy to run our model or to do some minor changes. Now this can be used. This is what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A7. You can see there is a Y. It says move parameter values. So if this is 1 is written here, so I can just move this parameter value. Correct, wherever. Just to look it nice. If there are bigger constructs or bigger models, then definitely you will have a lot of cluttered kind of view. So then you can just use this. I think this is not required. This is just to touch up. If you create a lot of arrows, for example, I create another thing here and I draw something from here to here and I want to make it look little nice. You can just use these touch-ups so that there is some uniformity, some touch-up can be given. This is something that I've told you already. Below this is your buttons. One is copy, and I think this is here also in edit. Copy. This will only be activated. This is B11, I guess. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. B9. I'm so sorry. So B9 will get activated once you run a model. This is just to see the AMOS output. Here it is the button to save. Below this, I think they are not required as of now. कुछ scanner हैं, कुछ microscope हैं. And some of them are, I think most of them are not required. For example, you can use this to increase zoom in, zoom out. You can use this as a scanner, sorry, as a lens. Maybe this. Sorry, I think to begin with, all these are important. Correct. नीचे वाले Bayesian का है ये I think moderation में होगा, multi-group moderation में. This is for print. This is for multi-group analysis. This is for undo, redo. So most of these buttons are.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please ask.
Yes, sir. This name of this application?
This is called as AMOS.
AMOS.
AMOS. AMOS software. Yes.
Okay. AMOS.
Yes.
Okay. Sir. Thank you.
I've just shown you this. The full form of AMOS is analysis of moment structure. It was initially an add-in with SPSS. अगर आप SPSS में जाओगे ना analyze के अंदर, so at the bottom you will find a tab called as AMOS. But since it was so comprehensive, so broad, its applications were used to depict. And I'm sure if you see a lot of good publication, maybe published in tier A journals, you will find a lot of diagrams are there where these models are depicted. So I think this increases not only the statistical sanctity, but the aesthetic value of the papers also. So you can show these diagrams to show the credibility of your work, to show your entire analysis. Correct. And as I was mentioning, two things which are very, very important to know theoretically. One is called as CFA and second is called as path analysis. CFA largely has two things. One is called as validity and second is called as reliability. I think there is another session tomorrow which is going to happen on CFA and EFA. Correct. So I may not be able to cover everything today, but tomorrow you will be able to have slightly more understanding on both the things. So CFA का मतलब होता है, full form is confirmatory factor analysis. Factor basically is nothing but a name given to latent variable or a construct. So I am basically using these three terms as synonyms: factor, construct, latent variable, some people call it as dimension also. So all of them are used as a synonym. Okay. Now should I go to the data sheet and tell you how do we work, or let me tell you some more things about AMOS before I forget. There are some assumptions of working with SEM and AMOS. Rather AMOS लिख देता हूँ यहाँ पर मैं. This was the point that I was making. This is the first assumption that we have with AMOS. Number one, number of statements in a construct. That means number of observed items in a latent variable should be more than one. Minimum 3 होने चाहिए ideally, but even if it is 2, it works, but then the validity is not that good. So it should be more than 2, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, correct. And then there are 2, 3 more assumptions which are very, very important. One is normality of the data. So data must be normal. I'm sure all of you know the meaning of normal. It means that the skewness and kurtosis should be avoided, should be minimal, or you have multiple ways to check normality, correct. One sample case test people use to check the normality, or the best way is larger the data, better it is, correct. So if the data size is very large, then by default it becomes normal. Next is linearity in relationships. So it does not get into the other kinds of relationship, non-linear relationships, square, cube, and all those. So it only captures the linearity. The last assumption, which is very, very important, I think in the preliminary workshop, I've spoken about the importance of the non-response bias and the missing values. So missing values is a crime if you're working in AMOS. So you must ensure that there is no missing value in AMOS. If there is any, you please work upon that. There is an SPSS window, or there is an SPSS tab which can give you the analysis, which can do the imputation for you using, there are 2 methods of missing replacement. One is mean, second is regression. So within them there are multiple, what do you call as, variety or subdivisions. So you can use any of those. But these are the 4 things, they are the must. And then these are the basic things to understand. Again, जो regression है वो काम करता है OLS, ordinary least square method, whereas AMOS works upon a different regression method which is MLE. थोड़ा थोड़ा दोनों में फर्क होता है, but largely there is not much of difference. So here you are basically predicting the statement through construct. This is the point that I was emphasizing in the beginning when I was asking which is independent, which is dependent. So you are basically predicting the statement through a construct. So if I look at this and I delete this, so if I have, for example, S1, I have got S2. तो एक चीज अच्छी देखी आपने कि this object property tab is opened only once. So wherever I am clicking, so it becomes the tab for that particular shape. If I click it on this, it will become this, correct. So for example, now I am saying there are 4 statements. So MLE के अंदर what I am doing is I am predicting the statements through the construct. So I am not predicting the construct through statements. That is why the arrows are on the opposite side. So I am predicting the statements, then that means these are the dependent and this becomes independent, correct. Now here there is another important point to understand. You can see these 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. So by default there is a inbuilt feature in SPSS, sorry, in AMOS, that the regression weights for each of the error term is 1, correct. So that means we are not bothered about calculating the regression weight, it is by default 1. And the regression weights, जो भी arrow के ऊपर ये 1 है ना, it is nothing but the regression weight. So what we are doing is we are basically saying that there are 4 regression and you have to predict other 3 regression weights based upon 1. So by default, if there are 4 items or 5 items or 6, पहली के ऊपर यहाँ 1 लिखा होगा, बाकी ऊपर नहीं लिखा हो रहा 1. Are you able to do all these things along with me, some of you? So this one, you can see this one. So if I click on this, you can see regression weight is 1 in the parameter. टेक्स्ट के अंदर नहीं होगा बिकॉज ऑब्जेक्ट प्रॉपर्टी सबकी होती है, एरो की प्रॉपर्टीज भी हैं. अच्छा, एक और चीज, whenever you put your cursor on any of these objects, it has to turn red. Until it turns red, you cannot click. जैसे ये लाल होगा, that means now it is activated. Correct. So if I put it on S4, this box will become red, this will become red, red, red. Otherwise, by default, the color of all these boxes is black. Correct. So I'm saying this one is written, this is an inbuilt algorithm within AMOS. Basically, it is saying that you give me one regression weight, and based upon this, I'll predict all other regression weights. Correct. So this regression weight is taken, and by mistake, if you delete this item number 1 maybe, so that means regression weight is also deleted. So now if I run this model, it will not work until I assign regression weight to any other arrow. So if I put my cursor here, it takes some time. अभी लगा देते हैं इसको as it is, ठीक है. So I have to basically put my cursor here and add one here, and now I can delete this so that this one remains intact, because otherwise there is a problem called as unidentification problem. You can see the last point on this slide. Regression weight on any one of the statements is compulsory, because otherwise there will be a problem called as unidentification problem, and that problem generally occurs with some of us consciously, unconsciously, because we by mistake delete one item and we forget to add one on any other statements. As of now, am I making sense? Are you able to perform certain things on your system so that I can move ahead?
Yes, sir.
अभी मैं डेटा फाइल पर नहीं गया हूँ. I have not touched upon the SPSS file. I have just told you what this tab is. Or if you look at in the center also, there are 3-4 small boxes. Correct. So the top box is important for us. So there are 2 buttons in the top box. One, you have a downward arrow, one you have an upward arrow. So downward arrow, if it is activated, it means you have an input model. The moment you run, the moment this model becomes complete का मतलब मुझे हर एक सर्कल के अंदर एक वैल्यू डालनी पड़ेगी. Correct. Now by default there is an option. If you click on this plugin button, you say name unobserved variable. जैसे आप क्लिक करोगे ऑटोमेटिकली इसको E1, E2, E3 and F1 automatically it gives. So all these circles and eclipse can be given a name by using this plugin name unobserved variable. So without naming all these variables, your model will be incomplete. अभी तो इसके अंदर डेटा फाइल हमने ऐड ही नहीं की, तो it is actually incomplete. So it will start working only when. And another thing that is very, very important is anything which is in square, anything that you write in this square, it has to be written in the SPSS file as it is. Did you get my point? So this square basically means it is an observed item, and the name that you give here must be exactly same the name in the SPSS file. Now, should I upload that SPSS file once before we break for lunch, and I will tell you how do we assign these values and all that? Shall I do that? Or
Yes, sir.
any doubt?
Yes, sir.
चलिए, good. So I am deleting everything. अभी हम एक बार क्या करते हैं, डेटा फाइल को समझ लेते हैं. What is that data file and how many variables does that have? So if you have seen that data file, let me also open that demo. This is the data file. See, until you have fair understanding on SPSS, the scaling techniques, the fundamentals like normality, like linear, like regression equation, dependent, independent, you cannot move into the higher order. Correct. तो आपको उसके बाद जाना पड़ेगा। अभी हम बात करेंगे जीरो ऑर्डर, फर्स्ट ऑर्डर, सेकंड ऑर्डर की, द सेकंड सेशन। It takes a bit of time. Till the time you can just try and draw some, so anything that you will plot outside this canvas, there is no problem in that. If I draw anything outside this canvas, it is fine, it will work. But if I have to copy that image, so that will not be pasted in your Word or any other document. So make sure that you draw your constructs on the canvas. My system is little slow. It is. Can you see this file? I've opened a SPSS file now. Again, for the
Yes, sir, it is visible.
participants who are slightly new to SPSS, SPSS file is similar to Excel file. The only difference is that it has got two views. Along with data view, it has got variable view. So if you want to know what are the variables, so you can just click on this variable view. So here you can see there are 16 variables. Now all of them are observed variables. None of these variables is a latent variable. Latent तो दिखता ही नहीं है. Latent value can be imputed later on, but latent variable will not be there until you run an AMOS or you run an EFA or something else. So latent variables are the hidden variable that you presume to be present, and because of their presence, the responses on these statements is there. Correct. Latent variable is nothing. तो अभी के लिए मेरे यहाँ पर 16 आइटम्स हैं, 16 स्टेटमेंट्स हैं या 16 वेरिएबल्स हैं, एंड फॉर माय कंफर्ट आई हैव नॉट गिवन एनी लेबल. यू कैन राइट द फुल सेंटेंस हियर. अभी के लिए मैंने यहाँ पर 6 स्टेटमेंट हैं. So these statements are basically nothing but statements on a variable or latent variable called as holistic frame. So if you have a holistic frame HF, so in order to measure somebody's holistic frame of mind, I have posed 6 statements and I have captured their responses on a scale of 1 to 5. So if you look at the data file, all these values will be from 1 to 5. हालांकि मैंने यहाँ पर इनको अभी तक नाम भी नहीं दिया है. So normally if you know the SPSS file, so you generally go to values, you name. 1 means strongly disagree, yeah, agree. 2 means this, 3 means this. So if you want to do, you can do it along with me. So 1, strongly agree, I am saying SA and add. 2, agree. 3, maybe neutral. 4, disagree, only D. And 5, strongly disagree and add and say OK. So you have basically assigned values. Now you can just copy this and paste it in all, because all of them are. अब मुझे बताओ ये कौन सा स्केल है? नॉमिनल, ऑर्डिनल, इंटरवल, रेशो. आई हैव जस्ट कॉपीड एंड कॉपी, कंट्रोल सी कंट्रोल भी कर दिया मैंने इसके ऊपर. सो विच स्केल इज दिस? इफ आई हैव गिवन द वैल्यूज ऑफ 1 to 5 to all my responses, it is
interval.
It is technically an interval, but here I will write it as a scale, because in SPSS there is no difference between interval and ratio. So I can either copy paste or I can just click on this button on the right hand side and just correct it as scale, because none of them is nominal. मेरी डेटा फाइल के अंदर कोई भी नॉमिनल वैल्यू नहीं है. All of them are scale and all of them are on the same 5-point scale. And why is it a construct? Because I am assuming as per the literature review कि ये जो 6 statements हैं, पहली H1 HF1 से लेकर HF6 तक, all these 6 statements together defines a construct, or it is other way around. There is a construct which manifests or which defines or explains these 6 items. Okay, at the back of the mind. Similarly, S1, ST1 to ST6, it is something called as strategic thrust. So strategic thrust के ऊपर 6 item हैं, which I am measuring or which I am asking in order to check whether individuals possess a strategic thrust. So whether they have holistic thinking, holistic frame, whether they have strategic thrust, and then I am also measuring another 4 statements or asking another 4 statements which are around a latent variable called as maybe risk taking, RT. ठीक है, 6 statements यहाँ हैं, 6 इधर और 4 नीचे. So in totality I have got 16 statements, and again if I go back and answer, there is no latent variable here. ठीक है, अभी मेरा objective क्या है? For example, hypothetically I have created a model here. If I just delete this, hypothetically if I create a model and I simply say there is one Control C, Control V and Control V. अगर मैं अपना एक मॉडल बना के बोलता हूँ and I say what are these variables HF, ST and RT. HF को मैं यहाँ डाल देता हूँ, holistic frame, strategic thrust, I do not know exactly क्या relationship है, but literature says that there is a relationship between these 3, and the relationship is like this कि holistic frame predicts risk taking. So I have put in a 2-dimensional arrow, sorry, 1-sided arrow, and similarly I can say strategic thrust भी अगर आपका अच्छा होगा तो आपकी रिस्क टेकिंग ज़्यादा होगी. कोई भी एक एम्प्लॉय है कंपनी के अंदर, if he possesses these 2 characteristics, so his risk taking will be higher. Am I making sense as of now? Yes guys, am I making sense? Is it cool so far?
Yes, sir.
I think other than Reena, most of them have either gone for lunch or are waiting.
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
We are
Yes,
there.
sir.
We are here only.
Hello, good, good.
Yes, sir.
we are there.
We are
It
there,
takes
sir.
time to unmute, sir.
Absolutely good. Good. Thank you so much. See, I am basically making, again, I am relating it to the theory. So there is a theory which says कि holistic frame leads to strategic thinking, sorry, risk taking, strategic trust leads to risk taking. अभी इन दोनों के बीच में क्या relationship है? I do not know. So maybe I assume that there is a 2-sided relationship. 2-sided का मतलब है कि they both are highly correlated to each other. ठीक है, ये दोनों के दोनों कोरिलेट भी करते हैं आपस में. अगर ये दोनों कोरिलेट करेंगे तो क्या प्रॉब्लम आएगी रिग्रेशन के अंदर? मल्टी कोलिनियरिटी, राइट? तो अभी मुझे विद डेटा ये चेक करना है दैट वेदर माय हाइपोथेसिस और माय assumptions that I made through the literature in this model are empirically proved or not. Correct? अभी तो सिर्फ ये 3 ही है. It may be a case that you may say strategic thrust is also a dependent and holistic thinking is frame is only independent. So it can be this way also. Holistic thinking से इसको बढ़ रहा है और इससे ये बढ़ रहा है. It can be that way also. So any relationship you may develop, you may create, but that relationship should be theoretically well backed. So now it can be नॉन रिकर्सिव, ये इससे अभी तो ये 2 में ही जा रहा है, बट इट कैन बी स्लाइटली बिगर ऑल्सो. सो इन गुड पेपर्स यू मे फाइंड देर आर 5, 6, 7, 8 variables and multiple things are there. Should we take a break now, or should we get into the data import and then see how does it work? Because it is already 2 o'clock now.
Let's take a break, sir.
Let's take a break.
We may begin from 3 p.m.
चलिए, perfect. ठीक है, I think you can all digest whatever I've said, because we hardly take a break in between, and there was a lot of overdose for some of you, but some of you it may be of interest, because if you have applied your hands on this. So let's take a break for lunch, and let's reassemble at 3 o'clock.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Great. Thank you, Anita. Thanks for the reminder.
We will start from 2:50. So please join on time.
In between, if somebody has not installed SPSS or AMOS, if you have time, you can do that. So if you do along with me, it is good for you. If you try to